Hello, my name is Trisha Snyder and I'm the owner-creator of 3D Underground Workshop. This is a tutorial of my resin-dipped peony flowers. A list of the items you'll need is in the description below. So to begin, we need to cut some wire. In this video I'm using 24 gauge silver wire. For this size peony I'm using a bottle that's 6.5 inches in diameter, which will take an 8.5 inch wire. A bottle that is 4.5 inches in diameter that will take a 6.5 inch wire, and another bottle that's 3 inches in diameter which will take a 4-inch wire. I use 5 wires for each size petal. This spool has 11 yards of wire and I used almost all of that wire, and there's just a little bit left over for mistakes or for extra petals as needed. Although I use bottles in this tutorial, you can use PVC pipe or any other kind of measuring tool as long as it's uniform every single time. Once your wire is cut, go ahead and wrap it around the bottles or measuring tool and twist. Make sure the twists are pretty tight and slide them off the bottles. You'll end up with 5 petals each, round circles, and then you'll start to crimp the wire. I crimp the wire for each petal individually, that way the wires are not uniform and it's a lacy, very delicate look. Once your petals are crimped, take a piece of wire and cut to length from the top of the middle of the petal to the bottom where the twist is. I cut between 5 and 7 for the big ones. The middle ones I cut between 3 and 5. And the smallest ones, most of the time I don't do any wires in those at all, as they'll hold the resin quite well without the extra wires. The wires serve 2 purposes. One, they will hold the resin onto the petal a lot easier, especially for the bigger ones. And 2, at the tips of the delicate edging, there's a little bump from the resin, and that causes a little bit of delicate look and 3-dimensional area at the end of the petal. I do use a UV lamp to help set the resin a little bit harder, but before then I use a handheld UV light to get the initial setting up of the resin. So this part is a little bit tedious and you have to be very careful. It takes a lot of patience and time. But if you dip the end of the wire in the resin, I would use the dippable resin because it's a lot thicker and it will stay put a little bit easier. Use the light to cure that, and I usually go around the edge and just lay the wires in the bottom, and then I'll go back and add a droplet of UV resin to the very bottom part and cure that. The very bottom where the stem is for the petal will be cut off, so you don't have to really worry about what the very end is going to look like as long as they're together. When you can't put the wires directly into the resin, I use a toothpick. It's very convenient and it holds resin rather well. A lot of times, even too well. I get a lot of resin on it, so you can let it drip off or scrape it along the side. My recommendation for putting the wires on is to not space them perfectly across. This will give them a little bit more definition and make the flower a little bit more natural looking. The more wires you use, the more definition you'll get. Once the resin is set up, you can either use your UV flashlight or you can use a UV lamp to set them a lot harder. You're going to be bending each petal just slightly forward, and that's going to give it a little bit more definition and more of a natural look. Do this with all of the large petals and the medium petals. The smaller petals I'll come back to. Now that the petals are all ready and the tedious work is out of the way, dipping the petals is the fun part. Try to dip the petals only once each, but if you do need to dip them twice, make sure you remove any excess dip, because the thicker the petal is, the less delicate it will look, and it'll weigh your flower down quite a bit. Here I'm scraping off the excess resin from the petal from the back, and I'm going along the edge so that each individual bevel is seen very well once it's set up. Once you have most of it scraped off, make sure that you're rotating your petal a little bit so that you can get all the resin evenly coated, and then hit it with the UV light. And once it's hit for just a second or two, it's going to set up fairly quickly. You want to make sure that it stays in a bowl shape, so that way your petals don't warp. After it's done, it will become hard, like hard plastic. It's not nearly as delicate as it actually looks. Now that I've got all the medium petals done, I cure them under the UV light for quite a while just to make sure that there's nothing sticky left on them. We don't want them to stick together. I also leave the stems on the middle ones, the medium-sized ones. I'll show you why in just a little bit. Coming back to the smallest petals, I didn't put wire on them for a reason. When you dip those, you can either let them be completely flat or you can allow them to warp. I leave just a little bit more resin on them than probably need be so that they will warp, because when you're looking at the inside of a peony, the middle petals, the smaller ones, tend to be not quite unfurled and open as the rest. And having them warp just a little bit more gives them some definition since they don't have the wires on them. So that makes it more natural and again gives it more of a delicate look. I leave the larger petals for last because they are the most difficult. The more wire you put on them, the less difficult they'll be, but you don't want too many wires on them. They are quite a bit bigger than the rest of them and they barely fit into the jar. If you want anything bigger, you're probably going to have to pour the dippable resin into a larger, wider mouth jar. These just fit and they are working out rather well. So now we're mixing the mica powder with a little bit of regular UV resin. I'm not using the dip for this, it's too thick. I'm making basically a paint with this. For my peonies, I use the darker color for the smallest petals, a medium to light color for the medium petals, and then I use a near white for the edges, which are the largest petals. I also do one thin coat on each side and cure it really hard, and then I do a second coat on each side. If you try to put it on too thick because it is resin and not paint, you'll just have a lot of buildup, and it's better if you do small thin coats And having them completely opaque is not necessary, but sometimes they get that way, and it's okay if some of them are a little bit more opaque than others. It's completely up to you whether you want your flower to be more opaque or more transparent. Here I'm mixing another two colors together to create the middle petal. And again, I'm using regular UV resin, not the resin dip, as it's a lot thinner and easier to apply. Here I'm cutting lengths of wire between 9 and 12 pieces to make the stamen. I'm holding 2 or 3 pieces of wire in my hand, making sure that they're separate at the ends. Make sure that they're even. That way, when you're holding them, scrape them through the resin, regular UV resin, not the resin dip, and you're going to get just a tiny little droplet at the end. You'll use your UV flashlight for this part. It goes rather fast, so it seems a little tedious, but it actually goes pretty fast. You don't need to cure each individual drop completely, just enough for it to kind of set up. And then you just keep dipping and scraping in to create those tiny little dots on the end of your wires. And that's going to be the stamen for your flowers. I did mix a little bit of darker resin. You can pick whatever color you want. I've used silver, gold, blue, and this one I'm using a cherry brown color. And I formed the balls completely already, and then I painted over them. But you can do it either way. You can create the balls with the resin already colored. And here I've put them all together. Close to the very bottom is where you want to use either regular UV resin or resin dip. The resin dip is thick, so it stays in place a little bit easier. And just dab it around the edges, try to get it towards the middle, but keep them in a round kind of solid bunch. Cure that, and once it's cured, set it aside. Just a little tip here, be very careful when you're using the UV light, flashlight. It's very easy to forget that you have an open jar of dippable resin right in front of you. And I ruined one dipping jar, or almost all of it, because I accidentally swiped over the top of it, and it cures very, very quickly. So you want to keep that light away from the jar. But as long as it's not directly shining in the jar, you should have no issues. Once you've placed your stamen aside, you're going to bend the wires on the middle petals down so you can hold them kind of in a bouquet. And start with all 5. Try to imagine how they're going to look. You don't want them completely flat, and you're going to try to put them in a perfect circle, but you want them overlapping a little bit in different ways, and twist the wires together as you go, and you'll have the middle part of your flower. You can bend them however you want. Make sure that you're very happy with the way they're set up. And then you're going to drop some of the dippable resin in the middle and on the back side and cure that. You can be fairly generous here with the resin. This is going to be the base of your flower, and everything else will be attached to it, and you really won't see this middle part. So it's good to have plenty of resin. Just make sure it's completely cured and set up very, very hard before you go on to the next step. I do use the UV light to cure it initially, but once it's cured and not sticky, I'll go ahead and put it under the lamp and let it finish curing very, very hard. Once that's completely cured, you're going to crimp and twist these wires together at the bottom. You're going to cut that off. I recommend using a much more heavy-duty wire cutter for this part because they are so thick. They do have resin on them, and you don't want to ruin any wire cutters that you're using. Now it'll be time to measure and taper your stamen down. I ended up having to cut quite a bit of these off. I like them to be a little bit higher. When I turn the petals to the side, I like to be able to see all the stamen at the top, and then you'll be pushing them down so they kind of get a little bit haphazard. But if you wanted to make them a little bit smaller and just spread them out, that's okay too. I just like to have mine a little bit more full. So here I'm cutting off the end. It's going to leave kind of a sharp area, but once you're done putting the bigger petals on the back side, then you cover that with resin and a little bit of resin paint and you'll be done. So once you have the stamen at the right length, you're going to dip the base of the stamen in quite a bit of resin UV dip and then hold them in place and cure that, and they will stay great. Now I'm just cutting the ends of all the petals off. You'll want to cut just a little bit into where the resin paint is, just to make sure you get all of the wire look off of it, especially on the smaller pieces. But these bigger pieces just set well on the bottom if you don't have any wire sticking out. So here I'm trying to get kind of a feel of where the little petals are going to go. They overlap in a different way. Some of them will go behind the others, and you don't want to make them look like they're in a pattern. So give yourself kind of an idea of where you're going to place those, and then it'll just come together naturally. I use wire cutters or needle nose pliers to dip into the resin, the dippable resin, place it the first petal where you want it. The rest of them will go in much easier than the first one. But hold it in place and cure it with your UV flashlight. Keep dipping the little petals into the UV dip and placing them around. You want to keep them in a fairly decent circle. But again, you don't want them to look like they're in a pattern, so just allow it to come naturally and place them where they're going to look like natural petals. Once you initially cure with your UV flashlight, you're going to want to use the UV lamp to cure the rest of the way. Again, you want it very, very hard before you go on to the next step. And this step is going to be the same way. Kind of get an idea of where your petals are going to go and how it's going to look before you place them on there. And keep them in a circle, but try not to make them look like they're in a uniform pattern. It was difficult to get this one to stay in place because I was trying to hold it with one hand, but the very first petal is always the hardest. And you don't need very much resin, just enough to keep it in place. You can always add more resin later. That will give you a little bit more maneuverability for your petals. Since the resin won't be completely dry and hard, you can actually manipulate them just a little bit so they fit together a little bit better. Once you have all your petals exactly where you want them, go ahead and cure that to a hard cure. And you can do that with your flashlight, but I recommend using a lamp. They just seem to be a lot better, and you can cure it for continuous minutes without running out your batteries. This flower is just about done. I did cure it under the lamp quite a long time afterwards. You add just a little bit of UV resin on the back and then paint it to give it a finished look as such. If you have any leaking, that means you didn't cure in between steps as well. You can fix that by either setting it in the sunlight for a few hours, or you can just continually use the UV lamp. Now I'm bending the stamen down, kind of getting them a little bit of more of a natural look, spreading them apart, and there's your flower. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please subscribe and like this video. More to come later. Thank you.